This is the Tree of Life, Season 16, Chapter 9. In this episode, we will be introducing the concept of dominance as between parallel analog and digital structures. To start out, in the last episode, we described a situation where there are three structures, one analog and two digital. In the analog structure, for person B, impulse 1 is affirmed and impulse 2 negated. In the first digital structure, corresponding to impulse 1, the same impulse, impulse 1 is affirmed and its dialectical by-class impulse, or contradictory impulse, is negated. This produces an affirmational valence as between structures 1 and 2. The third digital structure describes impulse 2, wherein impulse 2 is negated and its contradictory impulse by-class is affirmed. This creates a negational valence as between structures 1 and 3. Now, in the last episode, we talked about how in the recoiling of a series of movements oriented around some object, we see the transformation of digital structures to analog ones, in the negation occurring at the conclusion of those recoil movements. The idea was that when the attention is fixed on a bodily rhythm or cycle, it manifests as negation. This attentional self-consciousness by need only penetrates in the recoil to the extent that there is no mirroring between the movement of a particular plate and some other structure member. The idea was that in mirroring of the movement of a plate, we see a limit on the negation intrinsically, by penetration of that plate by attention, which is self-conscious referentially. We also discussed how path parsimony is associated with negational valence as between parallel digital and analog structures. We see likewise that time parsimony reflects affirmational valence as between parallel digital and analog structures. Thus, from the perspective of individual B, acting on negation of impulse 2, they recall path parsimony. Whereas, for person C, acting on affirmation of impulse 1, they remember time parsimony. Thus, we can see that path parsimony, which in a previous episode was described as being linked by continuity between these plates independent of time, determines the level by which the negational valence and corresponding analog conversion penetrates. In other words, the mirroring we observe occurring as between persons B and C on the particular plate occurs to eliminate or supplant the continuity between negational states created by the negational valence and path parsimony. Now, further to that, we must elaborate that in the conversion of a digital structure to an analog one, we see two classifications. When the analog structure is described by negational valence, the analog structure is dominant over the digital one, continuity and path parsimony describe the experience of the person. When the digital structure is described by affirmational valence, along with the mirroring of persons B and persons C, the digital is dominant over the analog structure. In other words, the dominant structure determines the subjective experience of the person reflected in the linking of states by either temporal continuity, time parsimony, or spatial continuity, path parsimony. That's the end of the podcast for today.